There is a city in southern Africa whose stone walls still stand today. They were built without mortar, without cement, without any binding agent at all. Hundreds of thousands of granite blocks, cut and fitted together with such precision that the walls have stood for over 700 years, through earthquakes, through storms, through centuries of neglect, and through something far more destructive than any of those things, through the deliberate attempt to erase them from history. The city is called Great Zimbabwe. At its peak, between the 11th and 15th centuries, it was home to an estimated 18,000 people, making it one of the largest cities on Earth at that time. It was the capital of a kingdom that controlled the gold trade across an area larger than modern France. Its rulers commanded wealth that drew traders from as far away as China and Persia. Glass beads from the Middle East have been found in its ruins, Chinese porcelain, Arab coins, the evidence of a city fully connected to the medieval world economy. And when European colonizers arrived and saw what had been built, they refused to believe Africans had built it. This is not an exaggeration. This is documented. In 1871, German geologist Karl Mauch visited Great Zimbabwe and concluded, without evidence, driven entirely by racial ideology, that the structures must have been built by ancient Phoenicians, or by the people of King Solomon, or by the Queen of Sheba. Anyone except the African people whose descendants were living there when he arrived. The colonial government of Rhodesia, the territory now known as Zimbabwe, made it illegal to publish or promote the view that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous Africans. Illegal. A researcher named Richard Hall was appointed as the official curator of the site and proceeded to excavate it in ways that destroyed evidence, specifically because he was searching for proof of a non-African origin and discarding everything that pointed to the truth. When professional archaeologist David Randall-MacIver conducted a proper scientific excavation in 1905 and concluded definitively that the structures were of medieval African origin, he was attacked, dismissed, and discredited by the colonial establishment. When Gertrude Caton-Thompson confirmed his findings with an even more rigorous excavation in 1929, she was subjected to the same treatment. The truth kept emerging. The suppression kept following it. Because Great Zimbabwe was not just a city, it was proof that contradicted the entire ideological foundation of colonialism. If African people had built one of the most sophisticated stone structures in the medieval world, had run a kingdom that dominated regional trade for centuries, had created a civilization complex enough to attract merchants from 3 continents, then the story that justified colonizing them, the story that said they were primitive, that they were without history, that they needed to be civilized by Europeans, that story collapsed entirely. So the story of Great Zimbabwe had to collapse instead. But let us talk about what was actually built there, because the architecture alone is extraordinary. The Great Enclosure, the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa, has walls that are up to 11 meters high and 5 meters thick at their base. They were constructed using a technique called dry stone walling, in which stones are selected and shaped to interlock without any binding material. The precision required to achieve walls of this height and stability using this technique is significant. The outer wall of the Great Enclosure is over 250 meters in circumference. Inside, it stands a solid conical tower approximately 10 meters tall, whose purpose archaeologists still debate. A granary, a symbol of royal power, a ceremonial monument. The builders were the Shona people. Their descendants still live in Zimbabwe today. The name Zimbabwe itself comes from the Shona language, Zimba Dzamabwe, which means houses of stone. The city was not a mystery to the people who built it. It was not lost. It was not abandoned by some vanished civilization. It was built by Africans, inhabited by Africans, and its meaning was carried forward by Africans, until colonizers arrived and decided it needed a different explanation. And Great Zimbabwe was not the only city erased from this history. Timbuktu, in what is now Mali, was at its 14th and 15th century peak one of the wealthiest and most intellectually sophisticated cities in the world. The University of Sankora in Timbuktu had an enrollment of 25,000 students, larger than the contemporary University of Oxford. Its libraries held between 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts covering mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. Scholar Henry Louis Gates, Jr. has described Timbuktu as the African equivalent of Athens or Rome in terms of its intellectual output and cultural influence. The manuscripts of Timbuktu still exist. Families have been hiding and preserving them for centuries, through colonial occupation, through political instability, through the deliberate destruction attempted by extremist groups as recently as 2012. Scholars are still digitizing them, still translating them, still discovering what they contain. And Aksum, in what is now Ethiopia, was recognized in the 3rd century CE as one of the 4 great powers of the ancient world, alongside Rome, Persia, and Kushan, India. The Persian prophet Mani listed it among the greatest kingdoms on earth. Aksumite merchants traded across the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean. The obelisks of Aksum, massive carved stone monoliths up to 30 meters tall, still stand today and represent some of the most sophisticated stone carving of the ancient world. These were not small stories. These were not footnotes. These were major civilizations operating at the highest level of their time. The reason you were not taught about them is the same reason the colonial government of Rhodesia made it illegal to acknowledge who built Great Zimbabwe. Because these cities, these kingdoms, these universities, these monuments, they are incompatible with the story that was told about Africa to justify what was done to it. Historian Cheikh Anta Diop spent decades documenting the African origins of civilization and the systematic suppression of that history. He argued that the disconnection of Africa from its own history was not accidental. It was a prerequisite for colonialism. You cannot enslave a people and simultaneously acknowledge their civilization. The erasure had to come first. But erasure is not destruction. The walls of Great Zimbabwe still stand. The manuscripts of Timbuktu still exist. The obelisks of Aksum still rise above the Ethiopian plain. The descendants of the Shona people still live on the same land where their ancestors built one of the great cities of the medieval world. The history was hidden. It was not lost. And now you have found it. The next time someone tells you that Africa has no history worth studying, remember a city whose stone walls were built with such precision they have stood for 7 centuries without a single drop of mortar. Remember that they made it illegal to tell the truth about who built it. And remember that the truth stood anyway, just like the walls.